This is Kicks Over Coffee. So as you can see, my good friend Ian Spaulding, who is the CEO for Elevate Global, has his Peets coffee. I also have my Peets coffee, and this is just casual conversations about the footwear industry over coffee. So the key issue that we're going to talk about today is factory compliance, which is a huge issue in our industry because obviously we make 99% of all our shoes sold in the U.S. are made overseas. So you've got a lot of staff and a lot of focus on factory efficiencies and production issues and quality issues, but also making sure that we treat our workers fairly, that they're paid adequately and properly, and the working conditions are really good. And this is something that obviously the industry has been working on for many years, but Ian and I are going to focus on specifically the trade wars and what that has done to CSR stuff. So Ian, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on Kicks Over Coffee. Hope your coffee's good and fresh and hot.
I'm actually dialing in from California, the home of Peets. So absolutely.
Awesome.
So thank you for letting me join and share a cup of coffee and talk about some of the latest on CSR in the field of footwear.
Awesome. Thank you. And you guys, obviously, just so everybody knows, we partner with Elevate Global for almost 10 years now on CSR issues and looking at and getting data points on what's happening in the industry and looking at the factory working conditions. And you guys also do it for a number of industries, so you guys have a wide purview. So as you guys look across what's happening in factories based on the threat of new tariffs and a lot of people freaking out about moving factories or changing even country of location, what are you guys seeing and what are some issues you guys are thinking about related to CSR issues?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously with the trade war that's going on between the United States and China, a lot of footwear companies and retailers in general are struggling. They're all trying to figure out what's our strategy. Now, a lot of companies have tried to move production out of China for the last few years, and they're better positioned to withstand some of the changes that are required as a result of the trade war. But there's still a fair bit of our customers that are in China in a big way, and they're a little flat-footed right now, trying to get capacity in Vietnam and Cambodia and Bangladesh and India, and they're struggling. And so there's a couple of trends that we see as a result of the trade wars. First off, we see that within China, we see an increase in unauthorized subcontracting. So factories that actually have historically been able to produce for foreign brands their footwear have realized that the only way they can survive is if they figure out a lower cost structure. And so they're moving production to cheaper factories in other parts of China. They may be splitting the production, doing partial assembly in some main factories, and then subcontracting for other parts of the production in other factories. Often without the authorization of their customer. And we find that we actually have been doing a number of investigations on behalf of big brands who have found this unauthorized subcontracting in their supply chain. Most of these cases, Andy, have come in for whistleblowers. So mid-level management who basically say, hey, I know this company doesn't allow this. I want to tell you that your product is not made here. And so forcing a number of folks to do some investigations and having very tough conversations. Now, outside of China, as companies try and figure out ways that they can counteract the tariff issue, they're actually moving production to Cambodia, to Vietnam, to Bangladesh, and other markets, and they're struggling because the maturity of those factories tends to be lower than the maturity of where they're leaving in China. So, in addition to that, we see that a lot of those factories in these other markets are booked already. They actually have enough customers. But they're still saying yes to the orders, which is creating some challenges with on-time shipment. It's creating challenges with excessive working hours. And also the same unauthorized subcontracting that I mentioned that happens in China is happening in other markets in Southeast Asia. So from a compliance perspective, the trade war is definitely forcing some companies to rethink what they're doing, and actually is increasing some of the risks that we see through their existing supply chain and then the new supply chain that they're trying to identify and work with.
Wow. So when we think about these subcontractors that are happening in China, you know, you point out there's whistleblowers. I guess that just points to how important it is to have a robust compliance program where these folks can actually utilize a whistleblowing system to let people know. I mean, if there's no infrastructure to where they can make a call or send an email and are aware, then obviously you wouldn't find out unless you have a robust operation when you're on the ground, which many people
Yeah.
have or don't have right now. So that's really interesting. What about, I have an idea, and I don't know if this is correct. You can tell me if I'm wrong or not. Usually I am wrong. But as people look at tariffs being added to footwear, maybe up to 25%, they know that there's a date of enactment. So I feel like a lot of people are going to factories and they're saying, you got to speed up, you got to get these orders faster, you got to get them out the door so that we can get as much into the U.S. before this date of enactment as possible. And in doing so, it may lead factories to believe that they can cut corners on working hours, payments, things like that. Is that something that is a concern that you share, or is there any data on that shows that, or am I just completely wrong and off?
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, there's definitely some shortcuts that some factories are trying to take in order to meet the compliance expectations. I think the subcontracting is just one example of that. I think the other challenges is in China, as you know, the wages are actually quite high. 4 to 5 times higher than what you might actually experience in Bangladesh or in Cambodia. But I think the social insurance costs are a big part of that, and we don't have those same social insurance costs in Southeast Asia. So remember, if you pay social insurance properly in China, it's 25 to 30% of your total labor cost. And social insurance in Cambodia and Vietnam and Bangladesh would be maybe 5% if you include maternity care and benefits like that. So it really is dramatically different. And so that's why you'll see footwear factories not pay the full social insurance costs in China. So not only are the wages higher, but the benefits are also higher there, which makes life a lot more difficult, which then creates a situation where if you come from a compliance perspective, the factory's struggling. They may create a model factory that does everything properly, but then they're forced to actually subcontract, because if they have to swallow a big trade tariff increase, or at least part of it, then look for ways to cut costs. And sometimes that means, hey, maybe we could reduce our social insurance payments by moving some of the production to another facility. Okay.
Kind of last topic of discussion. Yeah, go ahead and have your coffee. I know you want some more. Kind of last topic of discussion. We've done surveys with you guys for many, many years, and what I always thought was really interesting was the changing nature of the worker in the factory. So 70% of all our shoes that we import come from China. So obviously, just focusing on China, it seems like, and I don't know if this is still factually correct, but it seems like there's less migration happening to the coastal areas. It seems like, at least in footwear, the age is increasing. It's increasingly female. I don't know if you see that in other industries, but I think it's just, and we can talk about this, but is it just the changing nature of China where you have younger people not wanting to work in factories as much, and they want to work at a Starbucks or work at an office or do something a little bit different? I mean, it's not so different than here, right? I mean, what do you guys see in terms of the changing face of the footwear factory worker?
Well, I mean, so there's a significant difference between, say, China and Southeast Asia, right? Mm-hmm. So Southeast Asia is a younger workforce. It actually does have workers 16, 17, 18 years old joining the workforce. I think in China it tends to be older. And again, the younger workers do have a lot more options, not just in manufacturing, but in the service sector, as you've alluded to there. So we see an older population coming in. So the average age of worker in a footwear factory in China would be over 30 at this stage, actually. So whereas the average age in Bangladesh or Cambodia would be possibly even 20 or below, actually. So I think that's significant. I think what else is significant is the size of the factory is also reduced dramatically. So the average factory for footwear in China used to be around 1,200 workers, 1,100 workers. Now we're down to 400 workers, 300 workers.
Wow.
So the size of the factory is reduced. In contrast, in Southeast Asia, the size of the factory is also increased. So in Bangladesh, we see the average factory that we evaluate for our customers at around 1,700 workers per factory. So bigger factories, and they're growing. And in contrast, in China, we have bigger factories that are shrinking and the number of workers. Now, that also means that they're trying to invest in machinery, especially if the wages are as high as I'm alluding to. They need to invest in machinery and automation, et cetera. Whereas in Southeast Asia, the wages are not growing as fast. So they could probably get away with still trying to deploy more employees per line in contrast to what the cost structure would be in, say, China.
All right. So if people want to learn more about Elevate Global, they can just Google Elevate Global. Is there a URL that they can go to learn more about this stuff?
Yeah, you can check out elevatelimited.com. So we're a Hong Kong-based company. We've got about 700 people. Footwear is a huge merchandise category for us that we spend a lot of time and energy in. We're not necessarily shoe dogs, but we try to be.
Yeah. You guys do a good job. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Until next time, enjoy your coffee, everyone. Cheers.